Hello, welcome to another episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. Today is Saturday, February 17th, the first weekend without football for a very long time. I think it's over 200 something days or 210 days, 205 days, something like that until week one of 2024. So we got a long wait. The offseason is only just beginning. We've got a lot to get into in this episode. Even though the season's over, football really is a 365-day a year type thing. As always, joining me is DiMari Cooley. DiMari, how's it going, man?
I'm good. And to what you were saying, I think it's 206 days to be exact
26.
until football is back. So
Yep.
long off season, but like you said, football is 365 days. So a lot of free agents are pending. We got some big name free agents, combine coming up, draft coming up. A lot of speculation about what the Bears are going to do with their number one pick. Are they
Yep.
going quarterback? Or they trade down? So there's no games right now, but football isn't entirely over. So let's get into some things that we might see during this offseason.
Yeah, totally. You make a great point about just obviously the draft as well coming up. Could potentially some trades, teams trading up, teams trading back. Not really too sure yet who exactly is going to number one, who he's going to pick number one, potentially with the Bears moving in or out of that spot. Obviously, going to be an exciting draft as well. And then, of course, you got the combine coming up, free agency on March 15th, which is a little under a month away now. So, a lot coming up here over the next 2 months. And then really after that, you get into mini camps, training camp eventually after that, and the offseason starts to really fly by. So we'll kind of, I guess, put the bow on the 2023 season here officially with this first topic that we'll start with today, coming out of San Francisco after they lose in heartbreaking fashion to the Chiefs 25-22. Jet legend McCole Harmon with the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl, which if you would have told me that would have happened at the beginning of the season, I would have signed up for it. But here we are. Of course, he gets moved middle of the year. So coming out of that game, you have a lot of a lot of questions with the Niners surrounding the coaching staff, surrounding the team. And they make a change here, getting rid of Steve Wilks, who was their defensive coordinator for just one season. What was your reaction to this move as well? Reaction to this move, and do you see Wilks landing anywhere? What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it really caught me by surprise, and I hate to say he was a scapegoat for kind of how the season ended, but it feels like he was a bit of a scapegoat. I mean, you held Mahomes to 25 points, which like it's not a lot, but then again, I feel like that is successful considering what we know what Mahomes can do. And their defense was great all year. I mean, they were, I think, top five in every statistic this year, unless that kind of changed from like the last few weeks. But this was a great defensive unit that showed that they can play in the big games and that they can shut opponents out. But I don't think it comes down to just the Super Bowl as to why they decided to move on. I kind of felt like a mix of, well, we give up 40 to Detroit, and I think you
Yeah.
give up 40 to Baltimore, and then you lose the Super Bowl. So I don't want to go based off of just, it was one game and they were kind of just like, all right, well, it's time to pack your bag and keep going. I think it was over the course of a few games throughout the season where they started to see, well, we're playing these opponents that are very great offensively. The defense is not where they need to be. So I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can kind of understand where they're coming from by getting rid of him, but he won't be available too much longer. Somebody's going to scoop him up here in a few months, I think. So, I mean, he's one of the best D coordinators in football as he showed this year, despite, those few games they're talking about. So he'll be back with a job sometime soon.
Yeah, I agree. It seemed like at times there was a little bit of inconsistency with this group, especially down the stretch. You mentioned those two pop-up games, of course, in the playoffs against Detroit and then even Baltimore where they got blown out. I also think some of it too is he had Chase Young and Nick Bosa, and it seemed like at times they like Chase Young just didn't do a lot. Not saying that was all him, but when you have those two guys and they're not able to be completely dominant on each side, it's always going to feel like go back to coaching in a way.
Yeah.
Um, but then again, I mean, look, they shut down Mahomes in the first part of that game. Of course, they blew in the second half, which I think a lot of that has to do with Shanahan. But definitely, I still think it's a little bit surprising because this is a team that has had very successful defensive coordinators. You have Robert Saleh, who ended up going to the Jets. Now he's not any good, but it was a very good defensive coordinator. And you get D'Amico Ryans, who filled in for Robert Saleh, spent a couple seasons, and now he's in Houston. So it feels like they've just kept replenishing, and it felt like maybe Steve Wilks would be that guy, comes in for a couple years, then gets a coaching gig again. Obviously, that's not the case. Where do you see him potentially falling? Are there any teams that you have that maybe could be on the lookout for him, even not as just a defense coordinator, but just as some sort of assistant?
Well, we kind of talked off air a little bit. I would not
Yeah.
mind him in Dallas. I know that Mike Zimmer, I think, has already been pen to paper. But if some reason Jerry Jones kind of wanted to retract on that, I doubt it. But I think that would be a great move for Dallas, if they were able to grab him. But somewhere maybe where I feel like there's a lot of speed and a lot of guys that can fly around might help. I mean, Miami, I feel like would be interested. I'm not too sure what they're doing with their D coordinator. If they're going to get rid of him, he's going to stay. But I think Wilks is kind of one of those names where, like, if he becomes available, you kind of let go whoever you got, unless it's just a really solid option at D coordinator. So I'm honestly not too sure where he's going to end up at, but definitely somewhere similar to San Fran, where you got speed at the linebacker position and you got a dominant front seven. You don't need the best secondary in the world. You just need a secondary that can get the job done. So somewhere, someone's going to be smart enough to pick him up.
Yeah, and I think I'll say this too about Wilkes. I think the firing of him in Carolina was a little premature. I think he should have got another opportunity there after what he did with that team as an interim coach. Um, the Frank Wright situation was a complete disaster. And, they had, Wilkes got that team playing for him. He had them rally around him. He took that team from doing absolutely nothing to playing some meaningful games down the stretch in what was a very and still is pretty weak NFC South. So he'll definitely get another opportunity, whether that's, this season, next season. Coordinator right now, I think it'd be tough, but I could see him catching on to a place, definitely as an assistant, and then potentially getting another coordinator gig once more of those open up next offseason. But yeah, 1 year and done for him in San Francisco. And anytime you lose the Super Bowl, there's always going to be some sort of change. There's always going to be, like you mentioned, a scapegoat. And it seems like that was the case for him. Now you go over to the coaching side or the head coaching side of things with Kyle Shanahan. And, coming out of this game, a lot of people are questioning his ability to win the big game, and rightfully so. You go back to 2019, couldn't get the job done. A couple years later, he was the offensive coordinator, the blown 28-3 lead against the Patriots. And now here again, another blown lead against the Chiefs, where they held a 10-point lead in that game and ended up blowing it, especially in the second half. Do you feel Shanahan has the ability to win the big game? And look, Shanahan's a very good coach, don't get me wrong, but there is legitimate concern here. 0-3, and all three of these losses, a lot of them has been on him. I mean, they didn't know the overtime rules. That is a massive, massive problem. Super Bowl, you don't know the overtime rules. That's an issue. What was your impressions on the whole Shanahan situation right now?
I want to say yes, he can win the big games. I mean, he keeps getting them there, but I want to say no at the same time because you can't prove it until you actually do it.
Yeah.
So, like you just said, he was that offensive coordinator for the Falcons Super Bowl, and he blew that. And honestly, it looked better because they did end up making it to the Super Bowl. But if they would have lost that Detroit game, I think that kind of would have
Yeah.
been like, you know, it'd have wrapped it up for him, and he would have probably been out of there. But he gets them there, and what I can say is he's not quarterback wise, like he's not in there with a bunch of great play from his quarterback. So I kind of think that's what kind of gives him a little bit of leeway because I mean Jimmy G was a quarterback that he had in the Super Bowl, and then Brock Purdy. So you don't have, I don't want to say the game changer, as a
Yeah.
quarterback, but your weapons are getting you to where you are at. And then when it gets into those big games, you're not using those weapons that kind of got you to where you were. And I don't know if you've seen the thing with Brandon Ayuk on social media after the Super
Mhm.
Bowl, where it's like, don't forget how you got there. So it just seemed like there's one of those things where he kind of forgot about his guys that got him there and just went away from him, which a team like San Francisco, where you are loaded with talent, eventually that's going to happen because you can't share the ball with everybody. So with him, again, I know I'm kind of just talking in circles here, but I think my whole point is I think he's capable of doing it, but until he finds somebody to help uplift the talent around them, I know that sounds crazy because they might be the most talented offense in football. But until he finds a quarterback that I'm gonna say like a Joe Burrow, somebody like that will be consistent and will get the ball to his guys no matter what, he's not gonna win the big game because it seems like his scheme and just his philosophy going into those games kind of shies away from what got him through the season like altogether.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you mentioned that the talent is a great aspect of it because you go back to the Super Bowl back in 2019, he's got so much more talent now than he had that year. And the
Absolutely.
Chiefs had so much more talent that year than they have now. Like this Niners team was so much more talented than this Chiefs team. That's just the way it is, that they are talented. The Chiefs really don't have a number one receiver. We've talked about that a lot. Everybody's, mentioned that a lot. But you go back to that 2019 team, they didn't have Ayuk and they didn't even have Christian McCaffrey either. Those are two massive, massive pieces to your team that you didn't have back in 2019 that you now have against a Chiefs team that didn't have Tyreek Hill like that in 2019. Instead, it's Rashee Rice, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, guys like that, and you still can't get the job done. And then blowing another game is just brutal. And I heard this saying earlier today, and I thought it was really good. Shanahan runs a who's next system, and I thought it was a really great way of describing the quarterback situation. There's a lot of times there's every system it only it's one great quarterback for a very long time. Shanahan has the ability, whoever is in, whether it's Jimmy G, now Brock Purdy. Jimmy G and Brock Purdy are not quarterbacks that you'd ever think would even appear in playoff games, let alone Super Bowls.
Right.
Here they are. They've both appeared in Super Bowls. He has the ability, whoever's playing, Brock Purdy, Jimmy G, he has the ability to win those with those guys. A lot of that is the talent around them. If you gave any quarterback, Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey, they're going to be able to make plays. But he runs that who's next system. There's not many coaches in the NFL. We see what happened with Bill Belichick. Brady left and it was awful, right? Not saying Shanahan would have won 12 games with Mac Jones, but there's a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL that I'm sure Shanahan could get to the playoffs that other coaches can't. And I think that's where he separates him from the rest in terms of just an offensive mind. But at the end of the day, you got to win. You got to win the big games, and he hasn't been able to. And it's a serious blemish on his resume. But look, they've been to 4 NFC title games since 2019. They've gone to 2 Super Bowls. I think a lot of franchises would sign up for that, but at some point, you've got to finish. And you know, I I, I think a lot of people expectation is they'll probably be back. Do you see that happening again, or be back in the conversation?
I think they're going to be back. I think they're not a team that's going to fall out of that conversation as long as he's the coach. Because again, I mean, he's not winning the big games, but he gets them rallied. Come regular season and they compete, and they're a tough team to beat. But they're just they're no different than Dallas, I guess you can say. And I hate to bring Dallas up in this situation, but kind of the hype and the Super Bowl aspirations and what this team can and can't do possibly. And they are making it further than Dallas, so I'm not inferring they are really the same team. But as far as winning the big game, no matter if that is the wild card or that's the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl, you're not getting the job done. You're falling flat when it's that time to actually win it. So if he's the coach, they're going to be competitive, but I don't know what he's going to need to do to finally get them over that hump.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also agree with what you said earlier, just to touch base back on that, and we'll get to our next topic. He loses even the Lions game, he loses that. He's his seat's hot, but even if you lose that Packers game, you lose that Packers game to an inexperienced Jordan Love, a young roster at home with all the expectations, he probably be looking for a new job right now. So um, they're going to be in the conversation again. A lot of these teams, look, he's still a good coach. They've got the weapons. They're going to be right back there. It's just really a matter of if they can finish, and that's what makes the Chiefs so good. I mean, yeah, I don't think you're ever going to get Mahomes with this least talented of a team, and they still found a way to win a Super
No.
Bowl, which is just crazy. This was the year for other teams to take advantage. We've mentioned the Bills, um, the Ravens, and they still couldn't. So another team next year will have to try and come through and dethrone Kansas City. It's not going to be easy because they're only going to get better. So moving on here, we mentioned a little about Dallas. We'll kind of talk a little bit here, Dallas Jets. Some of the biggest offseason needs for both of these teams, and we'll take a look at some potential cut candidates, franchise tags, all that stuff. We'll start here with Dallas because they're more relevant in terms of I think they have a lot less to do. The Jets are a lot of work to do. What do you feel are some of the biggest keys for Dallas this offseason?
I think first you kind of want to start with Mike Zimmer now being the D coordinator, kind of get him some guys that he wants to play in his system. And I'm going to also tie that in with allow your guys inside your organization to come to Jerry Jones's office and like, hey, we want such and such, such and such as a free agent, and this is Dak, this is CD Lamb, this is Demarcus Lawrence on the defensive side. I feel like those guys should be able to go in that office and say, "Hey, this guy's a free agent. I want him on my team. Let's go sign him. Let's go make something work." Because these players have connections, and we seen CJ Stroud do it this year. He wanted Tank Dell in the draft, and they went. They made it happen. Those two made it like had a special connection. We seen Rodgers and your Jets do it, even though Rodgers couldn't really fulfill that this year because of injury. But
Yep.
that's the kind of thing with Dallas I've noticed where a lot of the front office decisions is Jerry Jones way or no way. I don't see why Dak can't go in there and say, for example, I want Mike Evans. Get Mike Evans in here. Let's form something. Let's go win a Super Bowl. And that's what they're lacking. So I think between letting the players inside the organization do that, along with Mike Zimmer, your new D coordinator, just handpick a few guys where, bring them in. Let's talk to them. Let's try to sign them. Let's make something work and let's go win a Super Bowl. And as long as they're letting Jerry Jones make the decisions about who to sign and who to trade and those type of things, they're never going to get over the hump. So I think that's first priority for them. And then second priority is kind of just cutting the loose ends, getting rid of the weak links. Michael Gallup being one, I hate to call out a guy specifically, but after his ACL injury, he wasn't the same, and we traded DiMari Cooper in hopes that Michael Gallup was going to be the number two for us, and it's not panning out how it's supposed to. So, I think you cut him, you go save some money, and you cut a few other guys on the defense. And we kind of spoke earlier off air about J-Ron Curse maybe have already played his last snap in Dallas. So guys like J-Ron Curse, maybe Jordan Lewis, we might see on the move. They honestly just need to bring in some free agents that's going to help them get over the hump because bringing in these guys and just having the news circulate around the names and you bring them in and throw a cheap deal at them hasn't worked for the last 29 years. So unless he kind of changes his methodology and how they're going to win a Super Bowl, they're not going to win one. I think they're definitely attacking the offseason and just completely dominating the offseason, how we have seen the Eagles do and the 49ers do the last 2 years. That is going to be the step one in order to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I totally agree with your point about Jerry Jones because we talk about a lot of times in the NFL and the good teams allow the football people to make the football decisions. Obviously, players as well getting involved. You mentioned with Rodgers, unfortunately, it didn't play out, and even all of Rodgers' minions that he brought in, none of them ended up really working out anyway. But a lot of times there's a lot of meddlesome owners in football. Woody Johnson's one of them. Jerry Jones, of course, runs the entire operation, and is just so very, would you say, like, very impatient in a way? I mean, I guess that's, I mean, the goal is to win now, but there's a lot of there's so much pressure and he's got so much control and there's very little say. Like the coaching staff has very little say, it seems, over a lot of the organizational decisions.
I want to say impatient if we're talking about Jerry Jones. I mean, it's been 29 years and you haven't really made a
Yeah.
significant change. So impatient is not the word, but you perfectly said it. It's just not giving that coaching staff the voice that they kind of need. And
Mhm.
that's a big part of what's going on. I mean, I think me and you talked about it before as why is Jerry Jones the only owner, president, GM, whatever that's doing like post game interviews in week 3 of the
Yeah.
season? It's all a distraction. So he does need to take a step back, go hire a GM, go hire a president, just be the owner of the football team and just show face when necessary. All the other like theatrics is just distraction for the team. Give the coaches and the players, and that ties back to what I was saying earlier, the voice to
Yep.
this is who I want to hear. I want him in the building. I want to play with him. I want to coach him. Give those guys that type of freedom and to express what they want to do with the organization, and then maybe we can see some things change.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, impatient isn't really the right thing, but I think, yeah, giving the coaching staff more of a say, and you always talk about, like, just we mentioned the meddlesome owners like David Tepper as well in Carolina. These guys have so much control, so much power. They don't let the other people do their jobs. They're just on top of them every single time, always overriding them, always making the final say in the decision, and not letting them really speak their minds. And I think if he kind of sits back and let the people that know football, know the ins and outs of football, make those decisions, this team can get back on the right track. We've talked about a lot, CeeDee Lamb having such a huge season. we mentioned getting rid of Mike. You mentioned getting rid of Michael Gallup, cutting some of the dead weight on the team. Um, who's a guy that you could see them bringing in either through the draft, through free agency, trade to pair with CeeDee Lamb, because he's one of the best receivers in football. And when you compare him against some of the other better ones, he doesn't have a legitimate number two behind him. We've mentioned that a lot during the year. You look at A.J. Brown, got Devontae Smith. You look at Tyreek Hill, has Jalen Waddle. CeeDee Lamb doesn't have anybody. Now, Jake Ferguson, of course, had a very good year, but that's tight end. Doesn't have a legitimate number two alongside him. How do you feel Dallas is going to address that? Is it through the draft? Is it trade free agency? What do you feel they need to do best route to help pair alongside CeeDee Lamb?
I'm gonna give you two names from the draft and one that's a free agent that I feel realistically could happen.
Mm-hmm.
If they're gonna address it from the draft, I mean, I love Keon Coleman from
Yeah.
Florida State. If they can, go after him, I believe he's 6'4" and just a freak athlete. And if you watch any Florida State this year, he kind of reminds me of Des Bryant in a way. And I'm not talking about just the big body, big catch radius, but just the athletic ability to do whatever kind of from the slot, from the outside. He can return punts. So that's something Dallas kind of needs, just an athlete that can be all over the field. Or Adonai Mitchell from Texas, who's another guy who's fast, tall, and they just need somebody to help stretch the field, what they didn't get from Michael Gallup. So if they can address that in the draft, taking one of those two, I think the offense will be in some pretty good hands to get somebody fresh, some fresh legs in that offense to pair with CeeDee Lamb. And we're talking free agency. Realistically, I really like Tyler Boyd. I know Cincinnati, they already got the thing with T. Higgins and Boyd also being one, so they're going to try to retain one or maybe both. But if they were to let Tyler Boyd go, I think he's a very reliable number two option, and he is the three over in Cincinnati. But I believe anywhere he goes, he could be a two, maybe on 20 teams in NFL. You throw him on Dallas, where he is very reliable, possession type of guy, third down, you know what you're going to get from him. You pair him, Lamb, Brandon Cooks, like you said, you mentioned Jake Ferguson, and if you want to throw Kevontae Turpin in their offense, mix some speed in with it, I think you got a solid receiving core going into next year.
Yeah, I agree with your point about Tyler Boyd. I like him a lot. He's a guy that I've looked around. If he does fall through, of course, it hits the open market with Cincinnati, depending on how they handle the whole T. Higgins situation as well. Um, I like the idea of bringing in Tyler Boyd. He's very consistent, one of the better very underrated throughout his career.
Very.
Of course, more of a number three over there, but you know what you're going to get out of him. He's consistent. He's on the field consistency. Very, very rarely misses time. A consistent, you can rely on him as a number two, getting the ball, third down guy, 820-yard guy, alongside CeeDee Lamb. Obviously had the two back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in 2018, 2019. And I think he's only 29. I mean, he's been in the league for a little bit, but still got, I'd say probably 3-4 really solid years left.
Yeah.
And when you look at his numbers actually in Bengals history, I wrote an article about this a couple weeks ago, looking at some of the options for the Jets, and Boyd was one of them. He ranks up, I think, top or fourth something in receiving yards. Like Bengals, obviously, of course, AJ Green, of course, they've had some great receivers over there, but he under radar actually had a very good career with Cincinnati and could be his first season away from there, which would definitely look different. And to your point about Keon Coleman, like him a lot. Adonai Mitchell's another guy. I also like Troy Franklin from Oregon is another one.
Yeah, that's another good one.
Yep. That I think some teams could look at. Roma Dunze, Malik Neighbors, those guys, of course, are way too early on in the draft that'll fall. Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU is an option. I think he might go a little bit earlier. He might go more potentially 17, 15 range. I'm not, there's always one or couple guys that fall through. This receiver draft's just really, really deep. Like, is there any, I know we've mentioned Ricky Pearsall a little bit, but just kind of as a side thing here, is there any receivers late rounds for any team? Is there like those late round gems that you really like? I know we've mentioned Pearsall, but any other pieces?
I don't know how late he's going to be, but we talked about Roman Wilson a
Yeah.
little earlier. I don't know that. I know there's a lot of other guys out, but he just really stands out. And I felt like his career in Michigan, he had a good career, but they were more kind of leaning on Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt if they were to throw the ball a lot more, he would have had a lot better numbers. Not saying that in a bad way, so I don't want to interpret that like he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't good at Michigan. Just they were kind of run heavy and reliable on that two-headed monster. but when he is available, and you're getting him the ball, as we seen in the college football playoff, like he is reliable, he's fast, he's a good route runner. I think that's one that could be a steal for whoever takes him in the draft.
Yeah, there's a couple really good ones. And of course, we've talked about as well Johnny Wilson. But yeah, Roman Wilson's a guy that got better each year. And this year really took off. Obviously, winning the national championship was a big part of that. A lot of Michigan guys in the draft. You buying the JJ McCarthy hype?
Not
His
not
draft
at all.
stock's rising.
Just I feel like I see it every day where they're saying he might get drafted a lot higher than what we think. And no disrespect, but I mean, he's Brock Purdy who just meditates. It's the same guy. We can talk about it later, but I'm
Yeah.
not buying JJ McCarthy. I mean, like I said, Brock Purdy's system type of guy. If anybody, respectfully, if any team is willing to take their first pick to build around him as a franchise quarterback, I don't know what you're thinking up here. Then again, he could gel to be something special in the NFL. I mean, Brock Purdy, who literally nobody and just came in and
Yeah.
got a team to a Super Bowl. So things can change, but I just don't think he's the guy you should build your franchise around.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. Every draft, there's always like those draft darlings that everyone just starts to fall in love with. Felt like a couple years ago, or what, 2 years ago, not really that long ago, was Kenny Pickett. I was talking to somebody the
Yeah,
other day, Steelers fan. He's like, yeah, don't draft him. He's going to be Kenny Pickett 2.0, which I don't know. I like McCarthy. He's not. I mean, I think he's more of a middle round guy that you can get. I mean, I remember a month or two ago, I was thinking as a Jet fan, he was projected to fall third, fourth round. We can get him Scipion Rogers for a year, and now he's all of a sudden going to be a first round guy before the combine and all that stuff. Pro days have even happened. Like, where's the hype
I
is just coming out of the middle of nowhere.
I don't want to see it again because you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about when I say this. I do not want to see a pretty pro day throw that just
Yeah,
takes
yeah,
his draft stock all the way up
way
here.
up.
I don't want to see it because it's happened before. You already know how that panned out before. So I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
I don't know. I guess we'll see. That's an interesting name. I'm excited for come draft time because right now his name is kind of anything can possibly happen.
yeah. It's going to turn into the Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence thing all over again, where, of course, Zach Wilson
Absolutely.
made the one pretty throw. But then you had people saying Zach Wilson was better than Trevor Lawrence. And it was like, no, Trevor Lawrence going into that draft was a generational talent. You have people, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be like J.J. McCarthy's better than Caleb Williams. Those are going to be the comparisons. This guy could be better than Caleb Williams. I don't think, I actually have my thoughts about Caleb Williams. I'm not as high on him as many, but he is the
Me either.
consensus number one. People are going to start comparing him to him, and I don't know. I could see that happening. But yeah, he makes one great throw. Watch out. Jets might take him there at 10 because we've seen that one before. They
And
don't
I
learn.
see you trading up to 5 to go get him if he makes a great rolling
Yeah.
out on the run type of throw. Jets are trading up to 5. They're going to have to get him.
They may trade up to 1 at that point. Just go all the way up. Trade away everything for JJ McCarthy, who
Yeah.
in 2 years will be looking for somebody else. Either way, we do now move on to the Jets here for a little bit. And then we'll take a look at some cut candidates and teams with the most and least amount of work to do. Look, the Jets obviously tumultuous 2023 campaign. You know, I try and look at it from, if you want to look at it from the glass half full perspective, you look at it and say, you've got Aaron Rodgers, you've got some really good young pieces, Sauce Gardner, Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson, Quincy Williams had a huge year. We know what Quinn Williams is all about. You got a really good, other corners such as Michael Carter II, DJ Reed, all of these guys. But then you also look at it from the negative view, and that is you need 3 new offensive linemen. You need a backup quarterback, and you need another receiver next to Garrett Wilson. Ideally, I'd like 2 more receivers next to Garrett Wilson. All of this, 3 new offensive linemen, 1 or 2 more receivers, and a backup quarterback. It's a lot of work. A
Tight
lot
end.
of work. Tight
You
end, yeah.
also need a tight end. I hate to throw it in there, but definitely that's
It's
another one I think you need to address big time.
yeah, and in 2, even the defensive line. I mean, you have 3 free agents: Solomon Thomas, Al Woods, and Quentin Jefferson. I'd like to see them bring back Quentin Jefferson. He had a very good year, career high in sacks, and missed some time, unfortunately, to a season-ending injury. But even there, you might have to bring in another piece. I do like the tight end thing. Conklin will probably only be here for 1 more year. He's solid, but future-wise, I don't know if you could fully trust Ruckert, which is why some people are very high on a Brock Bowers, potentially. Um, but yeah, I do like a young tight end would be ideal to develop and be the future because Conklin's good, but he's obviously not the future. Um, what do you feel? Just your kind of perspective from outside on the Jets, which a lot of work like always.
Definitely a lot of work. I mean, if I'm going to address the defensive side, I don't think that needs much work. I don't think you need to bring in somebody who'll be a day one starter. I mean, the defense
No.
was so good all year. You just bring in anybody for some depth, and depth is it. And
Yep.
just, have some guys that can go in case of injury or can that just come in different packages and, bring a new look to the defense. I think the defense is great. Don't touch it. Don't switch up the lineup, anything like that. But the offense is, I don't know. I just feel like you're building from the ground up with this offense. Obviously, we've seen it without Rodgers, so who knows what the offense would have possibly looked like. But how we just said earlier, I mean, I'm thinking about the receivers going into the year. It was Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, who was a healthy scratch for like a good portion of the games. Randall
Yep.
Cobb, who the only thing I think Randall Cobb did all year maybe was, I don't know, maybe get that fine in preseason. That was, you know, that was it. McCole Hartman, who was a Jet and just won the Super Bowl for the Chiefs, like you say, was not on the bucket list. So
Yep.
I hate to say it, and I know they want to make Rodgers as comfortable as possible, and it's kind of going to contradict what I was saying earlier about Dallas, where it's like let your players voice who they want to play with. But I think Rodgers' experiment 101 did not work. Don't try it again
Yep.
and just kind of ignore what he has to say to an instance. I mean, don't make it the Green Bay Jets all over again. Bring in some guys who actually going to help you win. So I know we mentioned Tyler Boyd for us, but I don't think Tyler Boyd's a bad fit for you guys either. I mean, again, reliable. You know what you're going to get out of him, and not the biggest name, but he's a respected receiver. And
Yep.
you have to game plan going into the game against Tyler Boyd compared to Alan Lazard. No disrespect. But you're not going into the game. We need to slow down Lazard. We need to slow down Randall Cobb. Tyler Boyd is one of those guys. So if I'm the Jets, I mean, I'm kind of looking in the mirror and I'm just like, division is ours. Division can be ours. We got one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play. We have a
Yep.
great running back. We have a great young receiver. So what do we need to do to help our quarterback? And perfectly said, you start with the offensive line. You help build that back up. You'll get some weapons and some depth at the receiver position and also the running back position. I mean, Brees Hall was great, but is your number two really that reliable? Talking running back wise, I know Cordell
Yeah.
Patterson, a guy who's available. I wouldn't mind Cordell Patterson as a Jet, who once again is one of those guys. He's a kick returner, he's a punt returner. You can use him as a receiver, you can use him as a running back. You guys got a lot of work, just a lot of work.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, running back wise, I think Devin Singletary could also potentially be an option. Was a
I
good
like
veteran in
that.
Houston. Israel Abanikando right now is the number two. He showed some sign. He barely played. He had like maybe one or two good runs. Barely played. Cook, of course, played the majority of the year last year. Singletary, I think, would be good. Of course, you mentioned Cordell Patterson, who was an option last year. Cook obviously blew up in our face. Somebody a little bit cheaper than that. Yeah, I mean, I think a veteran would certainly be good. An offensive line, ideally, I think you have to go out and bring in somebody through the draft and another one through the draft middle rounds. I think you go 10th overall pick, probably Talisi Fuaga is the guy I'm targeting most likely, with Alton Fashanu most likely not there. And I think you got to go free agency, whether that's maybe Tyron Smith from Dallas, maybe. It's
It's funny. It's funny you say
possible.
that because I was about to ask after you said your piece. I was going to ask if there is the possibility we move on from Tyron Smith. Would you grab him? How would you feel about that? That's quite interesting. We're
Mhm.
on the same page there. 'Cause I see us
Yeah.
moving on to save some money. You guys need a veteran, reliable tackle. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I like the idea of Tyron Smith. He's been excellent. He's been in the league forever. What is he? 8-time Pro Bowler, I think he is. He's
Yeah,
been top of the game for a very long time. My biggest issue with Tyron Smith is he's hurt all the time. He
injuries
misses a ton of time.
always.
I think he's missed at least like 3 years every single year of his career, or 3 games rather every single
That
year
and
of his career. It's
that's the
and that
thing. It's
concerns
like
me.
he's hurt, but when he plays, he's so
Yeah,
good. Like
he's
he's
excellent.
so good. He's reliable, and for Rodgers, who is getting up there in age and is coming off that Achilles tear, you want somebody solid on
Mhm.
your blind side, and I think that would be a great fit if he can play. But I mean, I hate to throw the jokes in at this time, but Tyron Smith's knees on MetLife turf is not
Oh, yeah.
not
That's
a
not
great
good.
mix
No.
for Jets fans. But just as a solid player who I think would protect Rodgers and kind of help bring in that veteran leadership that would get those other guys going, I think that's a great pickup if Dallas decides to move on.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the thing though, is like I really I would be on board for it, but the Jets would need to have a quality swing tackle behind him. Last year our swing
Absolutely.
tackle depth was awful. They can't rely on Billy Turner, Max Mitchell to get the job done. You just can't. Even back then, I wouldn't be able to rely on him. Maybe for 3 games, but you need to have somebody quality right there behind him, ready to go as a potential swing tackle option. Like a middle round guy in the draft, potentially Blake Fisher from Notre Dame's a guy that I've looked into a little bit. Solid, needs some work. He's got a lot of talent, needs to work. He needs to kind of be molded, really turn into a NFL offensive lineman, which I think there's a couple late round guys that I think have a lot of talent, but they need just a lot of work on form, get a little bit bigger, get a little bit more muscle, put more size on, a little bit more athletic, get speed, get to the NFL speed type of game. You can get one of those guys, Brian Tyron Smith, let them learn behind him. That's intriguing, but um, yeah, I mean, I think you go Talisi Fuaga at right side, Tyron Smith left tackle, and then your center is Tittman. Your guard, one of your guards is AVT, and then your other guard is maybe, um, I don't know. I mean, you could go maybe Christian Haynes out of UConn, Zach Zinter out of Michigan's an option. Couple guys there for Boston College. Christian Mahagany is another guy through the draft. So they've got to be strategic. I don't have a ton of trust in Joe Douglas because this offense line's been a problem since he got in here, and it hasn't gotten any better. It's actually gotten worse. So why should I believe that in one off season he's going to fix it when he hasn't been able to fix it for 5 off seasons? But I mean, who knows? They've got the resources. So yeah, Tyron
And
Smith's going to be a thing.
I
Tyron Smith
think
is it.
something crazy. I don't know. It makes sense in my
Mhm.
head, but I just feel like you bring in a set of guys who is going to be a little more optimistic to protect Aaron Rodgers because it's Aaron Rodgers. I know at the end of the day, every offensive line wants to protect their quarterback, but I mean,
Yeah,
you're blocking for the Aaron Rodgers, and you
yeah,
last thing you want is be in the
yeah,
doghouse with Aaron Rodgers, which surprisingly we've seen how bad the offensive line was
yeah,
when he was in there for his 4 plays. But I mean, I think you grab some guys that know what the task is, and the whole thing next season is going to be let's protect Rodgers from any injury whatsoever. I think that's going to light some fire in everybody's game come next year, regardless if it's free agent, somebody you take in a draft. That's going to be the big thing for the offensive line next year. Just keep the quarterback safe.
yeah, no doubt. And then in terms of just receivers here quickly before we move on to our other topics, I think my top of the list would be Mike Evans and T. Higgins. Those would be like my 1A, 1AB. I don't think that's going to happen. So I'd probably go after that. I'd go Calvin Ridley. I like that potentially. Good speed guy, deep ball threat, plays well alongside. I think Garrett would play good alongside Garrett Wilson. We mentioned Tyler Boyd. Um, Another guy potentially could be Michael Pittman, who I don't really know if he's going to leave Indy. I think they're going to keep him there. Young guy entering the prime of his career. I'd be surprised if he ends up here. I think most likely you're probably looking at the Calvin Ridleys of the world. Tyler Boyd, maybe a cut candidate like a Cortland Sutton or somebody like that might fall through. Even a Tyler Lockett, I've seen some people say if they move on from him, could he potentially come here?
Well,
Um,
here's
but
one
it's interesting.
I want kind of want to see where you're at with that. We just said a little bit earlier, Brandon Ayuk is unhappy in San Fran. He claims to
Mhm.
be unhappy. I mean, to the point even the girlfriend was on social media talking about
Yeah.
we might have just played our last game at Levi Stadium. Would you give up your first or second pick for Brandon Ayuk?
Like, wait, like our first, because I don't, wait, you mean first round pick this
Your
year
first
or
round
next
pick
year?
this year or either next year. Just I would probably say this
Uh,
year, considering that it is kind of win now. Looking at
yeah.
how the division kind of played out, and Rogers only had so much time. Would you give up a high round pick to go get? a reliable Brandon Ayuk?
Um, I don't know. Maybe next year's. I don't think I'd give up this year's. Um, if I'm gonna give up a first round pick, though, I still feel like it might have to be for Devontae Adams. So though I don't think he's gonna
I
leave
agree.
Vegas. Um, I would probably say that. I'd probably leave. I'd say that maybe you can get him for. I mean, we have a third. We don't hold a second round pick. You can get him with a third pick, 86th overall, maybe a second, like next year, maybe could get us over the top. But I think if you're going to spend a first round pick, I think it's probably for Devontae Adams.
Yeah.
But then again, I just don't. I don't love the idea of spending a first round pick because then I'm just a little worried then where we're going to get all of our offensive linemen. I think that 10th overall pick has to be offensive line. If you don't go offensive line there, then you're gonna have to rely on getting your 2 tackles through free agency, which is a little concerning
It,
because even if you bring in Tyron Smith and let's say David Bakhtiari, they're both injury prone. You know, there might be weeks where you're without both of them. That concerns me a little bit.
it's hit or miss.
Yeah.
But just considering how Ayuk has come along, like later portion of last year and this year, I feel like he's going to be one of those names where if he is unhappy, if it is true, where a lot of teams I think might throw some things at San Fran to kind of get him in in their uniform because I mean he's reliable, he do
Yeah.
everything, so wouldn't be a bad fit for a few teams.
Yeah, I mean, he's 25. He's entering his prime. You know, he's only been in
Yeah.
the league for 4 seasons. He's had back-to-back 1,000-yard campaigns. He's entering the prime of his career. If you can get him now, especially for a contender, because if the Jets get things right, they're going to be right back in the mix next year, especially for a team like that. I mean, you have 2 guys in their prime of your career. It's certainly exciting with Devontae Adams and or Garrett Wilson and Brandon Ayuk. And it's not like you're spending all this money for a guy to be here for a year or two.
Yeah.
Like we said, he's going to be there for 4 or 5 seasons, hopefully, if things work out well. So it's interesting. It's a lot of talent that could be available on the receiver market and through the draft. If there
Absolutely.
was a year to find a receiver, this is definitely the season because there's a lot of quality options out there and maybe some surprising ones like Ayuk that could potentially fall through and be trade options. So you move on here. So the U Stadium yesterday, the other day, posted a list of some potential cut candidates. Now, we were both talking this off air. I don't think all these guys are going to get cut. It's just potential cut candidates. So we can go through the list here a little bit. There was a couple receivers I know we were discussing off air that could fall through because we're on the topic, or could get cut because we're on the topic of wide receivers. What are some names from this list? I know we mentioned a little bit Mike Williams. I think one of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen is probably going to be out in LA. I think Mike Williams getting hurt last year, it can save them 20 million. I just think they're going to want to spend more of that money towards defense. I could see Mike Williams being a realistic possibility. Any other names on the list as well that could intrigue you?
Mike Williams, definitely, I can see that. Just considering the injury history,
Yep.
and Keenan Allen has just been super reliable. I know he's kind of getting up there in age, but right now you're kind of, and I'm gonna say it from again a Dallas standpoint. I feel like everything always ties back to Dallas. You stick with reliability instead of going about the ceiling of what it can be. And we made that mistake with Gallup, so I don't see the Chargers doing that with Mike Williams, where you cut Keenan Allen, who's reliable, and you go with the
Yeah.
ceiling, what it can possibly be, and keeping Mike Williams. He's great when he's playing, but he's just been
Yes.
injured, and I think he's coming off as an ACL again this year. So I just
Yeah.
don't think that's one you kind of want to trust. You go ahead and save that 20 mil. We know Michael Gallup's on that list. That's one that I feel like a lot of teams might hop on and give him another chance to kind of just build his career back and take their time with him. I feel in Dallas that's not the spot for him right now because it's Super Bowl or bust every single year, and you need instant results. If he can go somewhere, throw out a random team like in Atlanta that kind of got some years to kind of get some things together, just take some weight off his shoulder. That's a good one. Brandon Cooks, I hope is back with Dallas. I know that's another one I kind of seen on the list. Other than that, no, I don't really see much of those names getting moved around anywhere besides Allen, Williams, and Gallup. I feel those three kind of have the most
Mhm.
implications going into this year, just considering injuries and the amount of money they're supposed to make. Definitely.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of names that I could potentially see getting moved. Cortland Sutton's a name I know we just mentioned
Definitely.
with the Jets. The Broncos are going to be they're going to be in a salary cap dump. If they can move a little bit of money there, I think that's certainly possible. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, especially if the Chiefs go out there and bring in a legitimate number one. Hunter Renfrow could be an option. It seems like there's been a little bit of smoke in Vegas. Where there's smoke, there's fire. It seems like for a while now at the deadline, there was some conversation. In the offseason, there was conversation of him being moved. Now, again, potentially being a cut candidate. I feel like his time is got to be coming to an end. There's been so much talk at some point. It's got to actually happen. The
Well,
rest of the list, though, it's interesting.
I think I lied. I think there's two more names that possibly we could see on the move.
Mm-hmm.
One is Tyler Lockett. Not really sure if it happens, considering he's been so good for Seattle and just that consistent vet that you
Yeah.
want, regardless of who they bring in. I know they got JSN, still DK Metcalf, but you
Yeah.
want that experience. Deontay Johnson really hops out at me. I mean,
Yeah.
he looked great, especially last year. Like he looked great, and then some games this year he looked great. But then you see the emergence of George Pickens,
Yep.
and I follow a lot more Pittsburgh than I guess I do, but we've kind of seen last year just inside that locker room between Najee Harris kind of saying some things about Matt Canada, and Deontay Johnson was unhappy and George Pickens was unhappy. So it's kind of just like, out of those two receivers, who do you decide to keep and build around and just keep happy inside the organization? And I'm assuming they're gonna go with George Pickens, considering that his upside, he has a lot more
Yeah.
upside than Deontay Johnson, and he hasn't even hit the ceiling yet. I mean, we've seen what he can possibly do, but I think Deontay Johnson might be one if Pittsburgh wants to save some money, considering it's not a Super Bowl or bust type of thing for them,
Mm-hmm.
and if they can save some money, help build some pieces, especially for that offense, I don't think much needs for the defense. I can see him on the move.
Yeah, I agree. Deontay Johnson is definitely an option. I like George Pickens a lot. He's a good receiver. But the
Yeah.
locker room, you mentioned the locker room. It seems like sometimes it seems like locker room as a whole last year kind of
So
got out of
it's been
whack.
all of them, and I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever seen a Mike Tomlin led team just that much
Yeah.
in media. I mean, he coached AB. I mean, he really coached AB, and AB was sane in Pittsburgh. So I really don't think
Yeah.
that locker room ever we've seen like that, where it's just so divided, so split, and it just seemed everybody's main focus was personal accolades compared to, well, let's try to go win a playoff game, let's try to go win a Super Bowl.
Yep.
And it's a lot of divas in the locker room, and I don't want to say he's a diva, but his name is circulated a lot when it comes to the issues on the sideline and in the locker room as well.
Yeah, definitely. So then you move on here to some offensive linemen. I could see David Bakhtiari being cut, Corey Lindsley potentially, Mitch Morris. I also think Lincoln Thomas from the Jets could get cut. And I also think it'd probably be better off. You could save that money. I think you can get a better upgrade at guard for cheaper than him, which I think is something the Jets should look out for. Other than that, I mean, maybe I mean, I don't know if maybe David Andrews from New England, possibly. I don't know. I mean, other than that, I think those are the names that probably stand out to me, especially Lincoln Tomlinson. I think he's got to get cut. I'd cut him if I was the Jets.
Yeah.
Any names from the offensive line category?
Maybe Charles Leno. If I'm correct, he's still with Chicago, I believe. And I mean, Chicago does have a lot of money. If I am correct, if I think last place he was with Chicago, um, they have a lot of money kind of to play with. So depending on kind of what they do with Justin Fields and who they brings in receiver wise, um, his post June 1st will save 11.7 mil, which you can bring in quite a few guys with that money right there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one stands out more than anything.
Yeah, actually, I believe he's on Washington. Just checked. I believe he now is on Washington.
All right, yeah,
Leno. Yeah.
yeah.
Um.
My mistake.
Oh, no problem. What about like Cam Robinson? I mean, it's from. I don't know. I mean, there's I felt like Jacksonville fell apart this season. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I think. I don't know. I mean, there's maybe Andre Dillard. That's post June 1st. Morgan Moses is a guy from Baltimore that quickly turned into one of Joe Douglas's best moves, into one of his worst moves when they brought him in and then got rid of him. He could be moved. I mean, I'd be on board if the Jets bring him in he's been solid in Baltimore, but and then again, I think Baltimore might want to kind of keep that core intact because it was worked. So it'll be interesting. So then you move on to the other side of the ball. You look at defensive or edge, I should say. Another guy pops up here from the Chargers. Two guys actually from the Chargers. I know we talked a little about this off air. You could see potentially one of them being moved in Mac or Bosa.
Yeah, absolutely. If I had to take a guess, maybe it'll be Khalil Mack that they're going to move on from. Saves $23 million, and like we were just saying with the two receivers, I mean, it's going to be in that situation where it's like, let's just keep one and bring in a few other guys with that money that can still contribute. Don't
Yeah.
necessarily need game records at this moment, especially if we're not in a Super Bowl or bust type of situation. So let's go ahead and save the money on Mac. Maybe ship him off somewhere, see if somebody can eat up some of that money, or if they outright cut him. But I just don't see Mac and Bosa both being in the Chargers uniform next year. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Chargers are going to try and shave off as much cap as they can and put it towards some more, younger pieces, especially a guy like a Mac, save some $23 million, which is a lot. Other than that, I mean, those are the two main guys. I don't see JFM from the Jets here being moved. I just don't see that. He's been one of our more underrated pass rushers, good against the run, can play outside, can play inside. So I think he probably sticks here. You move on to the interior defensive lineman. Any names from this list that you could see potentially? I think it's probably.
I think they all stay set. Honestly,
Yeah.
just looking at each one of these names, I don't see anyone moving.
Yeah. And then linebackers is a little bit interesting because CJ Mosley's been a guy from the Jets that I feel like every year gets popped up in these conversations. I think they're going to stick with Mosley. I don't see where they're going to cut him. He's been a great leader, very good on the field, very productive seasons. It's really been his best stretch of his career, honestly. He's actually been better with the Jets than he was in Baltimore. He's been excellent. Don't see that happening. I would not want to see that happening. Demario Davis is interesting. Another guy that when he's at the top of his game is one of the better linebackers in football for New Orleans. All of these guys are post June 1st cuts, so it's going to be a while until you see if they can actually save anything from it. Any names here? I mean, I know those are the two main ones. Eric Hendricks, too, from the Chargers, if they're looking to move on from another veteran guy, could be here. But other than that, I think probably be it.
I think a majority of these guys stay set.
Yeah.
Similar to the D line. Leighton Vander Esch was one I thought maybe would have played his last few downs in Dallas, but after how the playoff went and kind of seeing that linebacker depth was very much needed, I think his space is safe in Dallas. I don't really see any of these linebackers being moved or cut.
Yeah, I agree. So then the secondary, these guys, I could see a couple of them being moved. Jamal Adams, you go to safety here first, just DBs in general. Jamal Adams, I could see getting moved. I could see Kevin Byard being moved. And then you mentioned Harrison Smith off air as a potential option for Dallas. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, when we were talking about it, it said he might be contemplating retirement. So I don't know necessarily how true, but if he does decide to, part ways with Minnesota, I don't think that's a bad fit for Dallas because J-Ron Curse is a free agent this year coming up. So, and a lot of fans, I guess, weren't happy, but fans don't make the decisions when it comes to the signings. But a lot of fans weren't happy with his play, especially in coverage and especially in the playoffs. So, if Zimmer did want to pair with a familiar face, I can see Harrison Smith being in the Cowboys uniform next year.
Yeah, it's possible, especially with the system. Of course, like you mentioned, could be a system fit. Jordan Poyer is one that I would definitely be interested in, or could be an interesting name. The Bills most likely, Micah Hyde probably becomes will probably retire. He's been there obviously for a while, spent a couple years in Green Bay, and I think the last 7 have been in Buffalo. Very good piece for them. They've been a great safety duo. Poyer, I could see getting moved. Potentially, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think they could look to say keep him for another season, but if they want to completely revamp that second or that safety core, they've got some young pieces. They could go down that road. Um, it'll be interesting. But and then you go over to the corner. I think Jamal Adams. I think that's probably an automatic. And I will say this: I do not want
Yeah.
Jamal Adams back with the Jets. I will make that clear.
I don't either. I remember, I think it was 2, 3 years ago where trade deadline. I'm just refreshing my Twitter every 2 seconds. Like, please tell me Jamal Adams got traded to Dallas. I don't
Yeah.
want it no more. Don't Jerry leave it alone. Not at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Um, he's too much of a he's just a disaster in the locker room. And then from the Jets perspective, he openly wanted out. Now to want to come back is just I'm definitely not on board with that. So no to that. And then that's pretty much it. And any corners that you see, I mean Trey White, I don't see that happening. JC Jackson, maybe. I mean, you could save obviously 14 million. Antoine Winfield, well, that's free agency, but we can get to him here in a second. We'll get to some of the franchise tag potential options here. Jumped ahead a little bit. Any corners that you could see here getting moved?
Maybe Patrick Peterson. I think he is
Yeah.
definitely up there in age, and the Steelers really found a gem with Joey Porter Jr. So if they kind of wanted to go young and go fresh, I think that could be one. And the
Yeah.
Pittsburgh Steelers kind of decide to cut ties loose and bring in somebody younger or whoever was playing behind Peterson last year. Maybe hopefully they learned enough to be able to be a starter. I think he could have probably played his last down with Pittsburgh at least.
Yeah. Especially with the age factor too, of course, mixing into that.
Mhm.
He's up there in age, not the same player once was. Similar to the Bills, maybe looking for more youth in the secondary. Could be the same thing here for Pittsburgh. So just quickly here, what are some guys, we talked about a little bit off air, but some guys that you could potentially see getting the tag placed on them. I know we talked about a couple earlier. On offense, any other defensive pieces that you could see getting the tag?
Let's see. I'm about to go over to the defensive section now. I think I did mention Chris Jones to you,
Yep.
where I could possibly see him being franchise tagged. Other than that, there's really not many names from the defense that kind of stands out. Check
Yeah,
out
the
the
only one I could think is
secondary.
maybe Antoine Winfield Jr. if they I mean, they've got obviously 3 priorities. You got Evans, you've got Mayfield, and you got Winfield all set to hit the open market. I feel like they're probably going to use the tag on one of those guys, not Mayfield. I think they're probably going to use the tag on Evans or Winfield. I think you probably go Mayfield long term, Evans long term, and then Winfield maybe the tag. I don't know. Because I don't know if they'll extend all those
Man,
guys long term. It's possible, but
Kenny Moore, I can see he's been one of the better
yeah,
slot corners for quite a while. So I just don't see the Colts moving on from him. Like that would not be a great decision from them. I can see him possibly getting the franchise tag because he's been pretty great for that
yeah,
coach team for quite a while. Looking at safeties, I mean, a lot of names don't pop up here unless Jordan Whitehead's going to hit the franchise tag, but I highly doubt it. Not much defensively. No, I think a lot of that's going to be spent on the offensive end.
yeah. I agree. Running back too. I don't see like Saquon getting tagged again. I don't see
No,
that. I know you mentioned maybe Swift, Josh Jacobs, maybe, but those I feel like are more unlikely scenarios. Pollard, unlikely um,
yeah, don't
scenarios. So
see many. There's really not. I mean, I think briefly here, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler. Feel like all those guys find new places are going to be on
yeah,
different teams. So I don't really see a running back getting franchise tag. If I had to take a random guess, maybe Tony Pollard again because I
yeah,
know he was kind of on a prove it type of deal. So if Dallas can kind of come back and just give him a friendly franchise tag there, because I think his market value is at 10.6 mil. I just don't see nobody giving him that contract. So no, I'm sorry, 6.5. So if actually I think that dropped. I think when I wrote an article on it, it was 10.6. So that might have went down. But I just regardless, I don't see anyone throwing that kind of money at him. So he might be one who could be franchise type if Dallas kind of wants to stick with youth and stick with what they got instead of
Yeah.
going after a bit older Henry. Definitely Pollard.
Yeah, no doubt. It seems like definitely Derrick Henry in Tennessee played his last game
Yeah.
there, so I don't see them bringing him back either. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens. And again, potential some tag and trade. So final segment here to close things out. We'll take a look at the teams with the most work to do. I guess I've got a couple teams here. Do you have any teams right off the bat that you feel like it start with the most work to do and then the least work, or most complete to least complete, however you want to word it, phrase it? Any teams that come to mind for you?
I think least complete. I hope it's not one of your answers, but it got to be the Panthers. I mean,
Yeah.
you brought Bryce Young in and you threw him in the fire, and I don't know, I feel like I'm on um a record saying this. I feel like I've said it so often, but your only reliable receiver, and you said it too, is Adam Thielen, who is very old.
Yeah.
You need to bring in a lot, starting with the offensive line. I mean, you think the Jets O line was bad, that Panthers O line was terrible.
Yeah.
Bring in some offensive line so your quarterback can actually get more than 4 years in the NFL,
Yeah.
and that's going to be them. And they're in a very weak NFC South, and it's a winnable division. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like there's one team that's winning it every year. It's definitely a winnable division. They do play good or play better in divisional games, like every NFL team does. So
Hmm.
if they want any chance of, I guess, dethroning Baker and the Bucks, I mean, you they got a lot to do. I can't even
Yeah.
start with where they need to start from top to bottom, but they have the
Yeah.
most work.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely a good team there. I'll also go New England here. They've got a lot of work to do. You hire a new coach in Gerard May, you get rid of Belichick, so the dynasty slate's officially wiped clean. You went 4-13. You won 8 games in your last 2 years, or 12 games rather in your last 2 years. 8 last year for this season. Anytime you go into the offseason with your main priority as quarterback, that always means you have a lot of work to do. They've got to get a quarterback. Drake May, Jaden Daniels there at number 3 could land. You probably look at it too. They need receiver help. Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas. Those guys aren't it. You need legitimate, young, talented receivers. Probably could use some help up front. And then defensively, look, they've got some guys like Christian Gonzalez. Of course, they obviously brought in, Judon as well. They've got some pieces in the secondary. Christian Gonzalez being the biggest one. Of course, was a rookie last year and had a very solid season. But other than that, there's not much. I mean, I think that it's a new coach. They need a quarterback. They need probably look at it too. I mean, I don't know how much you trust Ramondre Stevenson. I think you might want to look elsewhere as well for running back. Maybe. They got
Everything
problems. They've got issues.
they need everything.
Yeah,
Really,
they could use
everything
upgrades
besides
everywhere.
I don't know. I know I just said Carolina, but now just thinking about New England, they might be tied where it comes to who needs the most work because I feel like they're kind of from the ground up. At least with the
Yeah,
Panthers, you know that you want Bryce Young to be your franchise guy. New England's kind of just like, let's throw anybody under center at this rate.
yeah, yeah. And it's funny. So move the sticks yesterday. Daniel Jeremiah and all the stuff that they do over there for that podcast. They listed every AFC East team and they categorize them in different sections, like each player, blue chip players, which is like young guys that are really good, uh, guys that are like injury, contract, or old. The green means they're good. Pink means they're unproven or young. And the Patriots, according to this, have no blue chip players. They have no like young guys. They've got a bunch of guys in pink, which means they're unproven and young. Demario Douglas, Cole Strange, Christian Gonzalez. They've got a bunch of yellow guys that are old. Stevenson, Juju, David Andrews, Matt Judon, Jabril Peppers. Christian Barmore is the only guy on this list that they consider green good. So according to this, they have one good guy, and then their quarterback's just a bunch of question marks. So they got problems all over the place. I mean, when you have a 20-year reign of dominance, there's going to be a time where you're going to enter a full-on rebuild, and that is what they're entering right now. So I'll say, yeah, definitely Panthers, Patriots. The only thing I'll say here is with the Patriots is I feel like the Panthers, I just have no trust with that owner that they're ever going to get anything right over
Yeah,
there. And I do
not
think
at
there's
all.
legitimate concerns that they invested into the wrong pick in Bryce Young. So if that's true, then they've just set themselves back. Like if Bryce Young's not the guy, then that's a problem. I think If they can get Drake May, the Patriots, I like Drake May a lot. I think he's got the highest floor in this draft. If they can get him, I think they could turn it around. But yeah, I'd go Patriots. Just some other quick teams here too. The Jets obviously have a lot of work. I also think the Giants, they got a lot of work.
Yeah.
Figuring out what your quarterback is. If Saquon leaves, they're gonna need a running back. They need receiver help. Xavier McKinney's a free agent. They've got some things in the defense that they want to address. You've obviously got a new coaching or a couple new coaches and a defensive coordinator, special team stuff as well. So they've got a lot of work to do, especially from a coaching standpoint. Broncos as well, a lot of work with the Russell Wilson. Could be looking in for a quarterback in Zach Wilson. So it'll be interesting here. And then, what are the teams with the
Wow.
least work you feel?
I think these two might be surprises for you, but I'm gonna go and with Baltimore and Detroit. I just feel like they're right there. Is not really much they need. We just seen complete collapses in the playoffs, especially
Mm-hmm.
from Detroit. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where we're saying with the Jets earlier. I don't think on either side of the ball they really need somebody to come in and be a day one started, instant game changer, and they just need some depth at a few positions here. I know for Baltimore, Odell is a free agent, I believe. So maybe try to re-sign him back, get Rashad Bateman going early next season because when he is good, when he's playing, he's good. Those are the two I think will be right back in the NFC and AFC championship next year, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I totally agree. I definitely agree with your Lions take as well. Lions were one of my teams that I felt like didn't have much work. I'll go with a different team here. I also agree with the Ravens. They're going to be right there. I mean, I know they lost their defensive coordinator, but they've still got the guys. They've got the pieces to overcome that. This might be a sort of a surprise. I mean, I don't know if I want to label them as least amount of work. Maybe it's more so just like the best foundation. I'll go the Packers. The Packers just have a really good foundation. Again, I don't know. Maybe this is a different category because they do have some pieces that they need to fill. You've got to figure out the Jair Alexander situation. They can get out of that, whether or not they will. If Bakhtiari leaves, you might want to. They're going to maybe need some improvements up front. I think defensively, they could probably use some upgrades. The defense wasn't great last year. So from that standpoint, but in terms of foundation, I mean, you like your quarterback. Even if Aaron Jones leaves, you like AJ Dillon. You have a receiving core in Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed. They're all only going to get better. You hope Watson can stay healthy. I like the Packers a lot. I don't know if they got some work to do on defense, but I think in terms of foundation wise, and they're up there. And another team that might be kind of surprising, the Browns. I don't know the Browns have a ton of work.
I kind of forgot about the Browns. I mean, yeah, you figure out what's going on with Deshaun Watson, and Nick Chubb was on that list of guys who could possibly be cut to save some money. I don't see it
Yeah, I
happening.
don't
I
see that.
mean,
Yeah.
top 5 rusher every year he's in the league. The Browns are one I can see it. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, definitely. And you've got Chubb, even if Watson you don't love, but he's still there. Njoku, Jedrick Wills, Joel Batonio, Jack Conklin on the offensive line. Good offensive line. You got Myles Garrett, won Defensive Player of the Year. Greg Newsome, you got some young pieces in secondary. So I think the Browns too are up there. And of course, you got a coach that just won Coach of the Year. So I think there's a lot of good things there in
I
Cleveland.
think I'm gonna throw one more in there. I'm gonna stay in the NFC North, and we're talking about foundation. I like the Vikings a lot. I mean, I know a lot's going on with Kirk Cousins and what he's
Mm-hmm.
going to do, and Jefferson saying he wants to know the plan with the quarterback before he signs a contract. But I mean, we're talking Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, KJ Bourne, who can be a reliable option. TJ Hawkinson arguably might be the best tight end in football. He's definitely a top 3 tight end. They do need some work on the defense, but I have seen a few, pages from the NFL to kind of throwing out where free agents could land. And Tony Pollard in a Vikings uniform is one that I've seen quite a few. So, I mean, we're talking about a running back that's getting a fresh start and is good as a pass catcher and as a rusher. You throw Tony Pollard in that
Mm-hmm.
offense kind of with the weapons that they already have. With Kirk Cousins coming back, I think that's one of those teams that you kind of got to look out for, and it won't be easy for Detroit or Green Bay.
Yeah. The NFC North in general is dominant. It's going to
Tough.
be
It's
exciting for a
tough.
really long time. You want to know a team that I'm probably stupidly sort of like optimistic about if they get some pieces, the Arizona Cardinals. This might sound really
You
dumb.
know,
Now, they've got a
no,
lot of work, but Kyler Murray showed some good things last year. You got James Conner. They need receivers, a lot of receivers. Don't get me
absolutely.
wrong, but they get some pieces for Kyler Murray. Trey McBride had a good year last year, 800 plus yards as a tight end. Young, only entering his third season. They've got some guys. I mean, look, I think, I don't know. I mean, I think they were a 4-win team, but I think if Kyler Murray plays the entire season, they're probably a 6-7-win team. And that's with no receiver. I mean, you start throwing to guys like Greg Dortch and Marquise Hollywood Brown. Like, they need receivers. You give them a number one receiver, I think there's a chance they can maybe make a little bit of noise.
I agree with that. I mean, I watched 2 Cardinals games this year. One against Dallas, one against Philly.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different teams, and I mean, like you just said, they had no receivers, and Kyler Murray led them down the field in that Philly game, throwing the ball to Greg Dortch, and I believe
Yeah.
it's Michael. I think Michael Carter's on that team after the
Yeah.
Jets got rid of him. That
Yep.
is who he led a game-winning drive with, and I mean, their defense is not what they used to be. I mean, that defense uh, was great for some years. You know, they had Justin Simmons at a point, and Buda Baker's still there. So they still got some guys. They still got some names on that defense. But you throw in a few pieces here on the defense, and like you just said, you bring in some receivers, a true number one receiver. The Cardinals, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they're a weird, intriguing team. Now they got a lot of work to do. That's not under the category of least amount of work, but it's under the category of, I don't know, stupid, exciting teams. Maybe if that's a category that we could create. Um, but yeah, they might
Yeah.
be all right. I mean, look, they got to get the receivers. They need some help defensively, but they won 4 games with Josh Dobbs, Kyler Murray, and somebody else with no receivers, which I guess could be a lot worse. They were in some games. I mean, they were close to some games. I mean, they could have started out easily 3-0. So it's
I mean,
interesting.
week
They were in a lot
two
of
or
games.
three, I think week 2 or 3, they were beating the Giants 28-0, and they
Yeah.
lost that game. So there's some games they showed up. I guess I'm gonna say I thought they were a 1-win team, 2 at best, but they showed some heart and they showed some fight. And I don't think that's a team that would just be walked over come next year.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like they believe in Jonathan Gannon. There's some things. They don't do things it's not very smooth. You know, even his speeches and you got the fire in your gut, all that stuff doesn't seem very natural, but it might work, maybe.
It
I don't know.
works.
Yeah. Anyway, that'll close it out. Any other closing thoughts here before we finish things off?
That's it. I think we're good.
Yep. All right. So that'll do it for another episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. We'll have more content coming your way. As always, hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.